tighten your lines as we get ready to sail the seven seas on the Political Pirate Podcast. Join Captain Ted Yoho and the salty dog, John Martin, as they search far and wide for the greatest treasure of all, the truth. From local Florida news to nationwide stories and the globe beyond, we've got it all mapped out. Now here's your hosts, the salty dog, John Martin, and Captain Ted Yoho.
Welcome to our July 4th edition of the Political Pirate Podcast, featuring yours truly, the old salty dog, and the captain of our ship, none other than Ted Yoho. Good morning, Ted. Happy 4th, baby.
Good morning, John. Good morning, everybody, and happy 4th of July.
Yeah, I tell you what. So we're gonna dedicate our show today to the 4th of July. We're gonna talk about a story right here off the top that is not surprising, really, but a little bit scary and disheartening to a certain extent. And that is, and then we're going to share with you some of our memories of 4th of July and experience, and some of what we each think the 4th is all about for us personally and for us as a nation. But I want to start here, Ted, with a story out of the AP. National pride is declining in America, it says, and it's splitting by party lines, according to a new Gallup poll. And I pulled up this picture because when I read this is kind of what I think about. The Statue of Liberty, kind of just like that picture, kind of sad about this, because I never really thought that our country would get to this. And before I open it up to you guys, Ted, I want to read this one little figure here, because this is the crux of what I'm talking about. And according to the Gallup poll, only 36% of Democrats say they're extremely or very proud to be an American. I mean, 36%. I'm surprised. This is what surprised me. I'm surprised that there's any group of actual Americans, I'm saying, citizens of the United States of America, that feel only 36% feel pride in America. That's just hard for me to fathom.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And if they feel that strong about it and they dislike it that much, move, because America is what it is here in this country. America is liberty, freedom, and it means so much to people around the world. And if you don't like it, instead of trying to change it to your ideologies, just move.
Yeah, that brings up, as you always do, an interesting question. I'd love to know the answer to this. How many communist countries, let's just go right to the top or the bottom, however you look at it. How many communist countries have to deal with people lining up to get in their border, who are bum rushing their border, who are trying to take advantages of the services they have, or just simply seeking opportunity? There are people legitimately trying to sneak in here for opportunity. I get that. If I was in Guatemala, I'd probably be trying to get here. So I understand that. But how many, Ted, you travel all over the world nowadays. How many countries have to deal with people trying to sneak into their country for opportunity, for good reasons? I don't know of any communist ones.
Not many. You've got China, and who sneaks in there are people from North Korea. That's about it. So they're going from bad. They're going from worse to bad. But around the world, it just doesn't happen. And it's just true in nature too. You take cattle; they don't go to a field that's barren and no grass on it. They'll go to the one that has the green pasture. You look at birds. The animal world is so much smarter than we are. And 36% of Democrats. Only 36% of Democrats.
Only 36% say they're proud to be an American, basically.
That would leave 64% that don't like it. So again, send us your email. We'll send you a ticket.
Yeah, we'll get you on out of here. I mean, think about this, Ted. How many times have we had a flotilla leave Florida headed to Cuba?
Or
leave Florida headed to Venezuela? That just doesn't happen, right? But Florida's had to deal with that ever since the Castro Revolution, of people, and we're glad to have a lot of these people, proud Cuban Americans, but people don't generally leave. Even the elites threaten to leave, and only a select handful leave. And when they leave, they don't live like a peasant in the country they go to. They leave and live in a mansion and castles and all this kind of stuff.
Sure. And I admire the ones that said, I'm going to leave if Trump wins. And they did leave. I admire that. because they stuck to their convictions. I don't agree with them, but I wish more people would move with their feet when they say stuff like that. Like you said, there are no flotillas leaving America going to Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, any of these countries. They come here for a reason. Why would a man risk his whole family to come to America in a makeshift raft and float 90 miles from Cuba to here? That's how strong freedom is. And the thing with the past generations, for the most part, they assimilated into this country and adopted American ideologies as their own.
Yeah, I actually have a very good friend of mine, fishing buddy out there, and he might be listening. He knows who he is, but he was just an infant when Castro took over, and literally his parents, his mother told him that she had to run to the airplane holding him as an infant. And of course, two of his brothers were born over here because they were literally going to be thrown in prison, not for doing anything, just because they were on the wrong side of a political issue. And she was running with him in her arms to the plane to come to Florida. And of course, they came in that first group that came to Tampa some years ago.
Well, there's so many stories out there like that, but the younger generation, they never hear those. They don't believe them. I don't know what it is, John. I was just up in D.C. and there was a lady, her family came from Hungary when it was under communist control. Her dad didn't speak English. He came here. He was a common laborer, and they worked and they became successful in America. It's the American dream, and it's only possible because of the form of government we have, a constitutional republic, and of opportunity. If you have opportunity and you have the laws protecting your God-given rights, you can achieve anything you want in this country. And for somebody else, and I heard this all the time when I was in Congress, that the minorities were being held back. And we got in a heated discussion with one of the members. And I said, I disagree with you. I said, there may have been a time, but in today's America, the only person holding you back is you. If you're held back in America, there's somebody, you need to look in the mirror, because this is the land of opportunity more than it's ever been. All you have to do is apply the work and change your attitude, and it'll happen.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get back into this article a little bit because it is pretty fascinating.
I'm sorry, I was straight.
No problem. But this is, in case you're just tuning in, we're talking about the 4th of July, but we're using this article from the AP about this Gallup poll. More about this poll. The findings are a stark illustration, according to AP, of how many, but not all, Americans have felt less a sense of pride in their country over the past decade. This is the interesting part. The split between Democrats and Republicans at 56 percentage points is the widest since 2001. In other words, the difference in the amount of Republicans, which is usually in the 90 percentile, and the Democrats now at 36% is like a 56% gap there. Why do you think there's such a gap? And I don't believe, and of course some people would immediately say Donald Trump. Is that a factor? Certainly he's a factor. But this goes even before Donald Trump was president. Even during the Biden administration, the big majority, like almost 90% of Republicans still said they were proud to be an American. Why do you think there's such a gap between the trend with the Democrats and the Republicans feeling this way about America? What's your theory?
I think it goes down to ignorance and the way people were educated. You look at the guy that won up there in New York, Mamdani. His father's a professor at Columbia. In Columbia, we know, in fact, all the elite universities, 96% of their staff are Democrats and they're progressives. And so this has been taught in our schools. So number one, ignorance. They don't understand the foundational principles of American core values. And if they understood that, they wouldn't feel that way. If they were to go around the world and travel, they more likely wouldn't feel that way. If they worked for a living and just worked to get to where they are in life, they wouldn't feel that way. If you're handed something, like some of the wealthy people that have inherited money and didn't know how that money was created, then you start changing your ideologies. And this is what I saw with Obama. Obama came in, can I say came into this country? I'm not going to go into that discussion right now. But here's a guy that, by all outside lookings and trappings that he has, he's an American elite. But he despises this country because of the racial divide. And he had an opportunity to unite this country more than probably anybody before him in the last 3 or 4 decades. And he divided this country more, white against black, wealthy against poor. You know, he divided that to his advantage, and he became a multi-millionaire. And he was the guy that said nobody needs to make more than $250,000. There was a hatred for this country, and he carries a chip on his shoulder. And I think there's people like that. And I know you're going to go into that video of that one person.
Well, you know, you mentioned Obamas, and we're going to get into them more in just a moment. But you were talking about the money, and this is, I told people were worried about Michelle Obama running for president, and I said it's not. I told people flat out, Ted, it's not going to happen. And they said, well, you know, blah, blah. And I said, let me tell you, there's one reason why it's not going to happen. They're not going to take that pay cut. They're not going to. The Obamas have a $500 million deal with Netflix.
Is that what it is?
$500 million. That was what they signed. Now, they may have renegotiated, and you know, it probably went up, but $500 million. And of course, if they have any stock options, Netflix stock has gone way up. So I said, there's no way in the world they're going to take a chance that they might actually lose and put all that on the line. They're never going to do it, because the one thing we know about the Obamas, love them, hate them, whatever, they love the lifestyle of the rich and famous. They hang out with the upper crust of the world. The Obamas are absolute jet setters. They really are. You know, the funny thing about when you compare Donald Trump doesn't really gravitate towards the jet setters, even though he is one and he's a trendsetter. And I'm not saying he doesn't hang out with super wealthy people, but Donald Trump, and this is what attracted to me when I lived and worked in New York City in the 80s, Donald Trump likes construction people. He likes to actually hang out with average, everyday people, believe it or not. And I actually ran into Donald Trump. He wouldn't remember me from Adam. I didn't talk to him. But when he was coming through a job,
cut yourself short there, John. Everybody remembers you.
Well, I remember him, and I've always been a fan of the Trumpster way before he ran for president, just because the way he carried himself with the common folks that I saw in New York City myself. But the Obamas are jet setters, man. There's no doubt about it.
Here's the difference. Here's Trump. He carries his cup like this. Here's the Obamas.
Yeah, well, you mentioned cups. Let's take here's my cup. It says, I want you on my side of the wall. My wife gave me that when I first started doing a show a few years ago.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because you see this cup, it has no logo on here. And if you want to be a sponsor, your logo will be here and you'll get national recognition.
Absolutely. And we're going to be coming out with a brand new logo here very soon. By the way, I think I mentioned at the top of the show, but our show is now going to be called, it's the 3 Ps, easy to remember, Pirate Political Podcast, the 3 Ps. And we educate, activate, motivate, and activate people. That's what it's all about. But, you know, I asked you why such a gap. Here's something that's even sadder, Ted, getting back to this Gallup poll about.
Lay it on me, John.
It says here in the polling, only 4 in 10, which the last time I did my math, that's 40%, adults who are part of Generation Z, they're calling them, which is defined as those born between 1997 and 2012. So 40% of our young people that are Democrats don't feel pride in being an American. That is frightening to me, because that is the future right there. If that holds true, I'm not saying it's not true now, but if it holds true through the rest of their life, we're in pretty deep trouble.
We are. You know, that Generation Z, that's the way they're going right now. Of course, who are they influenced by? They're influenced by the AOCs, the P. Diddy's, you know, Beyonce, that disgusting lady that won that song for Wet, blank, blank, blank. And they're influenced by those people in social media. And then you have the the nefarious actors like Russia, China, Iran, South Korea, or North Korea, not South Korea, they're all on the social media spewing this hatred for America and telling everybody how bad this country is. And then you have the influencers that get on there, like your Mulvaney guy with the Bud Light, that are telling everybody how you should act, and it's not true. The neat thing is the change that we're seeing when it came in with Trump with his hard stance on the nonsense. The transgender movement, it's out there, but it's not front and center. And Generation Z is starting to change. I was listening to an interview last night with Riley Gaines and some of the other female athletes that got bumped off of winning their medals because of the transgender males that were in there. I don't even want to call them transgender, the confused males that were in those sports that bumped these women off. Now they're speaking up and they're taking medals away from the guys that were in women's sports. And so the tide is changing, and I think there's enough Generation Z out there that really feel the pride of America. And of course, you and I both know it. You see it more in the country than you do in the urban areas. It's just a different mindset being raised in the country versus the urban cities. And so I have hope in America. I believe in the system. You got to have faith in the system. The system has gotten us where it is, and we've had ups and downs in the past. We've had this divide, maybe not as, I've never seen a divide like we have now, but we have gone through these things. And if you have faith in the system and we vote properly with the right candidates, we'll get through this and we'll come out a stronger nation. I truly believe that.
Well, Ted, you mentioned that there's some signs of positivity about, so a lot of the young people, I have noticed it myself, are feeling the shallowness of what we've created here with this new kind of belief system. It's not very fulfilling. And that, to me, Ted, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, so I know you feel the same way, which is why I'm so glad that we've partnered up here on this. Because when I first started doing a show a few years ago, one of the reasons I did it was to pay back what was so freely given to me, the sacrifices that were made, because I kind of see our generation as a bridge between the people that like the greatest generation, the World War II people, the founding fathers, all the stuff that we learned, and the kids that are just like this now, just staring into their cell phones like that. We're like this bridge, because I tell people all the time, once our generation is gone, I'm not trying to put us up on some pedestal, but once our generation, our baby boomer generation is gone, that gap is not going to get bridged. So I feel a special obligation to bridge that gap, to carry what was instilled in me and my upbringing, to pass it to the next generation. What they do with it is up to them, but I definitely feel an obligation to pass that on.
And you're so right on that. It is up to us. And it's not that we've got everything figured out, but we're rooted and grounded in those principles that made America great. We've been beneficiaries of that. This is the thing about Obama and those type of people. Here's a guy, and he's like the third or fourth removed heir or the nephew of a very wealthy person. That person created all this wealth, and he's passed this on for generations. Well, then you get somebody like Obama who inherits that, but he doesn't understand how the money was made. He doesn't understand the sacrifice and the price paid for that. And so he just thinks, hey, I've got all this money. It's not fair that I have it, you don't. Of course, that's his message in the beginning. And like you said, there ain't no way they're giving that up.
They're not giving that up.
But they forget how it was made, and you got to keep working those things that got you that way. And this is what I like about the Trump family. I listened to a podcast by Eric Trump the other day, and he gets it. I mean, he's worked construction since he said he was 11 years old. I'm sure it's different than how you and I were constructed. But here's a guy that's been in the field. He understands those things. He understands the plight of the common man and how they got there, and how dependent we are as a nation on the working man, not the elite university professor telling you how things should be done. We're being taught by people that have done it. They've been in the trenches. And you brought out about Trump, he gets down there with people. That's the thing, you can hear story after story where he stopped and helped people on the side of the road in his limousine, and I've heard those stories, from other people that have been around him. And those are signs of great leaders. And, this generation now needs to understand where we are and look around. Who's leading you? Bernie Sanders and AOC and Mamdani, who tell you there should be no billionaires. People like Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, the butlers out of Gainesville, billionaires, they started with nothing, but they took advantage of the American opportunity and created the American dream. It's there for everybody. So instead of Mamdani saying there shouldn't be any billionaires, I'm like, why can't we all be billionaires? We have the same opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of opportunity, we got an opportunity. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and get back into this polling, because I think it's very important about the patriotism and the growing gap in America. So stay tuned. Absolutely. If you want to be a sponsor of our show, look at that tagline. You'll see it says "Contact Freddie." We can put your face, right on
your
the
logo
like this, that type of thing. But we'll be right back.
Right back.
Although the owner of Lewis Oil Company maintains she is 29, Lewis Oil turns 60 years old in June. Chevron would like to recognize the North Florida second-generation family-owned business, celebrating its growth and staying power. Lewis Oil Company maintains significant on-hand supplies, strategically located fuel depots, a delivery fleet, on-site service, fuel card locks, and convenience stores. Lewis Oil Company understands its responsibility in the local economy by providing service and delivery on demand and in crisis. As a first responder for 18 Florida counties and the Southeast from Texas to Virginia, we are proud of this rare accomplishment. Lewis Oil delivers.
This is Ward Scott, and I want to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills. The Ward Scott Files premium sponsors are Crime Prevention Security Systems, large enough to serve you, small enough to care.
Meldon Law, the only official injury partner of the Florida Gators.
The Ward Scott Files Gold sponsors are Lewis Oil Company,
Shoot GTR,
On the Spot Dry Cleaners, R&R Construction, and Style Cuts. If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, www.wardscottfiles.com, and click on the Advertise Here banner on the right side of the page, or call my friend Freddie at 352-284-3733. Again, thank you to all the great businesses that support the Ward Scott Files. And remember, if you like the show, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on your soul.
Or that very much surprises me that you've never been tased.
You can't handle the truth.
All these poop.
A warthog. He's going to come up the steps. Here he comes. Oh my goodness, and he's huge. Hello, boy. I wonder if we can pet him. Hi, boy.
Can we touch him? No, don't.
Help me! Help! Help!
Well, welcome back to our Political Pirate Podcast. Here, our 4th of July special edition with none other than our Captain Ted Yoho and yours truly, John Martin. And I want to show people real quick, Ted, because you obviously have a very patriotic shirt on there. I'm not just, there you go, that I'm not just wearing some dingy thing here. I do actually, in the spirit of it, 1776, baby, America. So I want people to understand that even though I'm in the bunker in Hawthorne, I'm not just all ragged out. But when we went to break, we were talking about this new Gallup poll that came out that essentially said that 36% of Democrats actually have pride in being an American. And there's a 56% gap between what Republicans feel about the country and they do. And this goes back even during the Biden administration, Republicans were still in the 90 percentile proud to be an American. But we went to break. We're talking about 40% of Generation Z, I think it is, feel pride in America. But Jeffrey Jones, listen to this, Ted. Jeffrey Jones, a senior editor at Gallup, which did the poll, said, but even among the older generations, we see that they're less patriotic than the ones before them, and they've become less patriotic over time. And he says the polling shows that's primarily driven by Democrats within that older generation. Sure. So across the board, the Democratic people who identify as Democrats are feeling less patriotic all the time. And my question is this based on fact that something's really happening, or is it fictions? Or are they doing it to themselves? Because I got a feeling there may be some facts, but I think a lot of it is self-imposed because of their belief system and the messages that they're giving themselves. But that's just my opinion.
No, I think they are. And I think it's just a difference in outlook on life, how you look at it. You know, it's the glass half full, glass half empty. You know, I've always been an optimist, and I believe in the greatness of America. I've experienced it. I've lived it. You know, Carolyn and I don't want to bore you with the story, but I mean, we were picking up soda bottles because we were broke and taking them back to Publix and Winn-Dixie. But we knew there was opportunity that if we worked, we would achieve. And we had dreams and aspirations and goals, and we just worked. And that's available for anybody, John. And these people that feel this way, I feel bad for them because they don't have a future to look forward to that's brighter. You know, they're complaining about how terrible it is. By God, you know, wake up. You know, let a thunderstorm come down and shut your electricity off for a couple hours and think of how happy you are when it comes back on. You know, that's America. You know, you're in an area and in a country that you can do literally anything you want to, provided it's legal, moral, and ethical in this country. And you can't do that in any other country, John. I mean, I was in Thailand, and when I got off the bus that they picked us up from the airport, I was in Congress. You get the embassy attache that comes and kind of gives you a briefing on the country. And the last thing he said before we were getting off the bus, he goes, I need to warn everybody on here, do not say anything derogatory or negative about the King of Thailand because you'll be thrown in jail. You know, think about that. And he goes, and if you're in a cab and you talk to the driver and you're talking negative, if he doesn't tell the authorities and he gets found out, he'll go to jail. So, you know, for the Democrats that don't like this country, go to one of those other countries. I'm sure Rosie O'Donnell and Ellen DeGeneres, I'm sure they have a lot of space in their villas over there, and they would be happy to have a company with misery. Misery loves company. So, you know, there's plenty of people you can go to.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that about going to other places, and they talk about Canada all the time, you know, and fleeing to Canada. But I want to warn people about Canada. It's if you're Canadian and you're coming into America now, this was a few years ago, it's not that big a deal. But to go from America into Canada, they are pretty strict about that. You know, they really are. It's not as easy as you think for Americans to go to Canada. I had a friend of mine. He spends about half the time in Canada. His wife's Canadian, and he's a U.S. citizen. And he was trying to give away a Corvette to his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law, he'd give it to him. But Canada said, in order to do that, you'll have to pay $30,000 to give away this car. So anyway, it's just it's a lot different.
I had people that had a DUI, say 40 years ago. So it's still on their record. They went up to Canada, they did a background check, and you had a DUI that showed up 40 years ago. Said, we don't want you in here. You can't drive on our roads.
Yeah, we can't. That's one of the main problems of illegal immigration here. More people, they talk about crime, but the statistics show that by far the most crime as far as resulting in death and injury is actually illegal immigrants driving drunk.
Yeah. I know 3 people that have been injured that way. I know some that have been killed, their family members. And, you know, I love Canadians. I love Canada. My only problem with Canada, it's above the Mason-Dixon line. And Ted doesn't like to be above or below 70. I like 70 and above. It suits me well.
I hear you. But, you mentioned something earlier in the show talking about people who have traveled and should know better. But I got to thinking about two different people. One of them you mentioned, one of them you didn't. One is the Zoran dude running for, the Congress, running for mayor. Well, he comes from a pretty wealthy-to-do family. You mentioned that about his father. But I think, didn't they come from Uganda?
Uganda, yeah.
Yeah. So my question would be to him, why did your family leave Uganda? I mean, if Uganda should be a paradise for them, but he's coming from a pretty well-to-do. But you know what really, and I agree with you about people that aren't educated because they haven't traveled and that. But what's really scary to me is you got a guy like Tim Walz. Now, love him, hate him, whatever. Tampon Tim is not a dumb man. He's an educated man. He knows. I mean, he's not a radical idiot. He knows things, right? Now, this is a guy who spent extensive time in China. Now, he lied about some of the experience, but that's the other thing. But this is a guy that just a couple of weeks ago, we talked about on our show, literally said that maybe it's time for China to be the leader on the world stage. Now, here's a guy that has experienced all this stuff, seen all this stuff, but he's preaching that kind of crap here in the United States. And those people scare me because, a young person might say, well, here's a world travel guy. Here's a guy who was in the service. Here's a guy who was close to being vice president of the United States, was governor of this state. And he's telling me this. I don't think he has any credibility, but I can see why a young person might think he actually has credibility. And that type of thing scares me because I wonder, could they really believe the crap they're preaching?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to bring him up in that paper I sent you. You've got people like that. We're talking about Generation Z, how, they're just ignorant. They don't understand the foundational principles of this country. If they do, they wouldn't act the way they do. Then you have people like Walz, who knows better. He knows what this country stands for, but he's got that political slant he's got the liberal Democrat disease that just has a hatred for this country. And again, if you feel that strongly, Tim Walz, move. Why do you want to change what we have in this country to fit your ideologies instead of accepting the way this country's been for 250 years, and it's a work in progress, but you don't tear it down because you don't like it. You work to make it better. And when he was in Congress, he wasn't working to make it better. He was working to divide it, and he's still doing that. And to say that China would be better at running the world order and setting the rules of the new world order that is developing, he's way off. And I want people to understand, I don't believe in the world order and globalists and, all that stuff or one world government. I believe in a standard that America has set that people aspire to come to this country, that beacon on top of the hill, that 4th of July really exemplifies and amplifies around the world of freedom and liberties of what you can do in a country. And Tim Walz talking about that in China. Yeah, go to Tiananmen Square, Tim, again, and pay attention because the tanks ran over people, up to 10,000 people they just killed right out there. And
there's only one thing, Ted, I can think of that might actually improve if China led the world. We might have more access to human organs for transplant because they are harvesting organs from people, So that might actually improve.
Well, since you brought that up, I want people to know I just wrote an op-ed that I submitted. Hopefully it'll get printed, but I sent it to John and it'll be on the website about made in China. What is the real cost of being made in China? And they're not going to celebrate a 4th of July like we do.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. But let's get back into this again a little bit. We're talking about a new Gallup poll that came out that talks about the slipping, if you will, of feeling patriotic. Yeah, feeling patriotic about America and how the Democrats are actually, that's one thing they're leading in, and that is being unpatriotic. Because, Ted, I was thinking about this. I've said this about like guns. Growing up in the environment I did, I never thought about gun control, or I never even thought about the Second Amendment because we just all had guns. It was just part of it. But here's another thing. I never really thought about being patriotic when I started to think about it. I grew up with the World War II generation in a small little southern town here, and we just were patriotic. I never gave a thought to, well, should I be patriotic, or how do I feel about that? We just were. I never even gave it a second thought. It wasn't until I became an adult and all of this crap that we've been getting over the last 30, 40 years that made me think about it.
Exactly. And I started off in Minnesota and went through the 4th grade. Every morning we said the Pledge of Allegiance. I never thought about getting down on a knee and not saying the Pledge of Allegiance. We were Americans. It's like you said, we didn't make a distinction of being patriotic or not patriotic. We just were. And
yeah, it was just part of life. It's like the air you breathe.
Yeah. But
you wonder why some of these things are changing. I want to play a video here. You mentioned the Obamas, and it could be attitudes like this. I want to play this video, if we got it set up, of Michelle Obama when basically she was accepting that they were winning the election and going to be the first couple of United States of America. Take you down memory lane. Check this out.
Seen that.
Memory, I don't.
But what we've learned over this year is that hope is making a comeback. It is making a comeback, and let me tell you something. For the first time in my adult lifetime, I'm really proud of my country. And not just because Barack has done well, but because I think people are hungry for change. And I have been desperate to see our country moving in that direction and just not feeling so alone in my frustration. And
there you have what was going to be and has been the First Lady of the United States of America, the first African-American president in history, Obama. And a lot of people don't think about this, but the reason why Obama got elected president, love him, hate him, whatever, is a lot of white Americans actually supported President Obama. A majority, actually, in some cases, voted for him. And at the time he was elected, Ted, I kind of felt a sense of, well, maybe it's overdue. We'll give this man a chance. But I got to tell you, when I heard Michelle Obama say this, and I go back to saying I was raised with the World War II generation, I have to tell you, watching that live, which I did, really pissed me off, because I'm thinking, how in the world, if you look at where you are in life, where your husband is in life, where you're about to be, how could this be the first time you're proud to be an American? Now, you could talk about the black experience and all that and everything, and I get it. I get it as much as an old Southern white dude could. And I can understand feeling a certain, but to me, you would feel gratitude and overwhelming a sense of accomplishment. But to literally say it's the first time. So in other words, you hadn't been proud when Martin Luther King came on the scene and did what he did. You weren't. I go back and look at Mr. Douglas back in the day. They tore his statue down when he came out, back during the Civil War. If you know your history, there's many reasons for black Americans to be proud of this country, and there's many reasons to be upset as well. It's a mixed bag. Human beings are. But I don't know. It just really ticked me off, Ted, when she said this, and I'm wondering what you thought about it when you heard that the first time.
I just want to know how you really feel there, John.
You can tell it just gets
I remember those words. I watched those words. And like I said earlier in the show, this was a great opportunity for the Obamas to bring America together. But that divide opened up, that chasm opened up more than I've ever seen. And that was the beginning of it, because it was white against black, conservative against liberals. And it's grown since then. And the Democratic Party really changed. It started with the Clintons, when she called everybody deplorables and all that, but Obama was there too before that. But it's been festering, and now it started off as just a little spark in the woods that was smoldering. Now it's a raging forest fire, and that's why you see this hatred we have and the riots where they were having them with in Los Angeles and all these other cities over immigration. It's because they worked at dividing America more. It was an opportunity for the first African American president. And I was like you. There was a lot of white people that voted for him. My mother voted for him. She and I told her I didn't. I said, I can't believe you voted for him. She goes, well, you're racist. It's because he's black. I said, Mom, if I remember, he's half white, and I don't like the white half either. And we talked about that. The second go round, she didn't vote for him because she didn't like his politics and the division that he was doing. And she was the older generation, obviously. My dad was in World War II in the Air Force. And that message that we grew up with, and it's like you said, I never thought about being patriotic. We just were. That's been lost on this generation. And they need to come back to our roots and appreciate what this country really has. And our educational system, all the way through, but especially at the higher educations and our universities where the elite professors are, they're not teaching this. And I'm sure you've talked to students from the University of Florida, Santa Fe, not so much Santa Fe College, but if you have a conservative viewpoint, the professors just don't like you. I mean, and they're afraid to speak up. And that needs to change. And I think you're seeing it change. And Trump's doing a good job. I mean, it's ugly, it's brutal, but it needs to happen.
Well, I think, too, the fact that, the legacy media has been so damaged, and Trump has exposed them in so many ways in his campaigns and now his second term as president, that it makes him more important than ever shows like what we're doing. Because to me, I asked, what can we do? And I talked earlier about my own personal motivation. I know you share the same thing. We have to educate, motivate, and activate people. And I tell people all the time, not everybody can be a fighter, but everybody can support those that are in the fight. And so that's why I ask people to support shows like ours, like what we're doing, spread it far and wide. Maybe if you're a parent or grandparent, give your grandkids an assignment to watch a show like ours, so maybe they get a different point of view.
We'll be hoping inspiration.
Get an inspiration from Captain.
Well, you brought up, why do you think you're going to those poll numbers? Why do you think that Generation Z or X or whatever alphabet letter they're on now, why do they feel this way? Well, they're motivated, they're activated, they're just not educated. And they're not educated in the very basic principles of what America is and why it's so important in the world that we maintain, but not just maintain, we make it better. And the way you make it better is by being educated and activated and carrying on the torch that's been passed on to us, as you said, the greatest generation, World War II vets that came back fighting a world war on foreign soils to protect American values, that they pass that torch on to us. And as you said, we may not be the World War II veteran or this or that, but we have those values grounded into them, to us, that we want to pass on to that next generation.
Well, I had back when we were talking about the mayor of New York race, but back when Andrew Yang was running for president, remember him? Yeah. When he was talking about the universal income,
right?
And he said something about $1,200 a month. A young man who was probably in his early 20s at the time said something to me that just terrified me. Mm-hmm. He said, if I could get $1,200 a month from the government, I would never work again. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, do you realize how imprisoning? You're basically putting yourself into slavery yourself and serfdom if that's the way you think. And it's scary that a lot of people thought that way. Apparently not enough, but maybe in New York now they do. But I want to play this video.
I've seen people offered opportunities, make a couple thousand a month. And they're like, well, if I do that, I'm going to have to give up my benefits. I'm on work comp and I'm on disability and Medicaid, and I'd lose all that. And it's the same thing, as Andrew Yang offered to that young person that said that to you.
Well, it's one of the challenges, quite frankly, of like the big, beautiful bill and all this kind of stuff, is we have gotten, a lot of people are dependent on government. They don't even really kind of realize that they are. And you start taking some of that stuff away. And the president actually talked about that the other day. It's hard to take something away once you've given it.
It's terrible. Well, before you go into that video, that's just a perfect point to point out that guy wants $1,200 a month. And if I can have that, I don't have to work. This is what the Democrat philosophy and the progressives do. I want to give you what you want so I can keep you where you're at. And then they have control over that body. So
yeah, I want to play this video. It's a CNN video about President Trump's poll rankings among Republicans right now. This is pretty interesting. Check this out.
Everybody.
Listen to the voice when these CNN guys have to report this. They don't like what they're reporting. Check it out.
Is now retiring, and the reason everyone came along except for Susan Collins, the Rand Paul thing wasn't a surprise to anybody, is the following. I'll give you Harry Enton on CNN earlier.
So we're going to look at the strongly approved numbers. So this isn't just Republicans who like Donald Trump. This is Republicans who love Donald Trump. And he's up like a rocket. Look at this. In July 2017, the strongly approved was 53%. That's pretty good. But look at where he is now. 63% of Republicans strongly approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing about 5 months into his presidency. Republicans love Donald Trump the way that Americans love Disney World. The bottom line is 63%. That is a huge, huge base. And of course, it's just part of a Republican base in which about 90% of them overall approve of him, including the somewhat approves as well.
That's the thing, Charlie. There was a political reality in that Senate overnight.
That to me is an amazing stat right there. If people didn't really get it, let me just explain it very quickly. What that CNN reporter is showing is that among Republicans who voted, in this case overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, they are as happy with him being the president and what he's doing basically as any president in modern history has been. Now, it's not his overall approval rating, but of the people that essentially put him in office, they are loving what he's doing. Go ahead, Ted.
You know how painful that is for CNN to have to do that. For them to do that, I applaud them. But it's just that it's really the sentiment of the silent majority in America that is doing this. And that's always been true. The silent majority is silent for a reason. We don't have to go out there and bluster and, tell everybody how great we are or how great America is. We know it, and we want you to experience it. And, I think there's just a lot of truth to that. Don't trump or blow your own horn. So go ahead. I was going to say something.
Yeah, you always trigger thoughts in me, Ted. You know how that is. It's like, I've shared this before, but I'm in recovery myself. I've been clean and sober since March of 1988. And I used to work at a drug treatment center.
Congratulations.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been a lot of hard work and a lot of help from other people and God's grace. But I used to tell my clients when I worked at a drug treatment center, if I could take this shirt off and put it on you, you could feel the way I feel about being sober, then you would do anything to get there. And I feel the same way about how I feel about being American and patriotic. If I could literally take this shirt off and hand it to some of these young people, especially, and they put it on and they could feel the way I feel about this country, I would give it, I'd literally give the shirt off my back for them to feel that way. And so that's one of the motivations. I get emotional thinking about it for doing the show, because I want people to feel the way I feel about being in this how blessed I am to be here. That's what I want people to feel. Sorry, I get emotional thinking about it.
No, you do. And that, that's why you do so great on the radio or on the podcast, John, is because your heart's in it. And it comes across. And, I feel the same way. I get a tear in my eye when I watch the Star Spangled Banner being sung or played, or the Thunderbirds fly over, or Navy jet, or military people standing up, saluting, saying Pledge of Allegiance. I get a tear in my eye. When I see people achieve, when they work hard and they achieve, I get a tear in my eye. And I would speak to young groups that were disadvantaged, and they're in a wayward home or, a foster home. And I would talk to that group and I would get tears in my eyes. I actually cried because I remember where I was when I was out on my own at 18, and how you feel lonely, despair, like the world's against you. But I had that flicker of hope. And I love this country. You know, like you said, I was patriotic when I was born, I think. You know, you just never thought anything different. And that's the thing that we have to pass on. And you just can't give it to them. You can inspire them to have that. I appreciate your feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. God bless America, and God bless Carolyn Yoho for rescuing you. Tell her I said that. But I have so many memories, and we're getting close on time. I'm not going to share them all, but the 4th of July has always been special to me. We used to take these trips as family on 4th of July, all that kind of stuff. But I want to play for you, Ted, my greatest personal memory of 4th of July, because I was at this event in New York City.
That's pretty awesome. You said you were there.
Yeah, I was on a rooftop not far from where the president was speaking, and I was up on a rooftop party and could see everything perfectly. It was right on the river. It was unbelievable.
This ought to be played in every classroom around this time. I'm just going to
play the short version of it, but people really need to watch it all. Maybe I'll post it on our Facebook site.
I would.
Here's President Reagan lighting up the Statue of Liberty, guys. Check it out.
Known around the world as a confident and a happy people. Tonight, there's much to celebrate and many blessings to be grateful for. So while it's good to talk about serious things, it's just as important and just as American to have some fun. Now, let's have some fun. Let the celebration begin.
A light to the world, a beacon held high. The great symbol of freedom beckoning from a harbor. To the north.
I mean, Ted, I was there. I saw the fireworks. That's one thing about it that spoiled me is no fireworks show has ever been the same since, because it would be impossible really to top that. And I was right there at that time. It was amazing.
That's AmericaByGod.com.
Absolutely. Well, you know, we've only got about 5 minutes left in the show, and we've covered a lot of it. And you mentioned about kids beginning to turn around a little bit. There are some signs. You know, Trump's election is a sign to me, but there is somewhat of an awakening, and we just got to keep kind of pushing that. And because there's a lack of perspective, there's a forgotten history in this country, both good, bad, and ugly. I'm for teaching it all. And what you talk about a lot, Ted, is there's a loss of culture.
Mm-hmm. There sure is. And, you know, I've been blessed to have lived pretty much my whole life in agriculture. You know, when I was 15 years of age, that's when I started. So I've been around the rural crowd, and there is no lack of patriotism around that. And when I was in Congress, we would do the military academy nominations, and to see these young men and women come in there and the pride in this country, willing to serve this nation, and the interns that came up to our offices in DC and in the district that have moved on and gotten involved in politics for the right reasons to defend what this country stands for and those values. It makes you proud, and you know it's not lost. It's just that we need to get their voice out more and get it out into the media, because the media is working against us. And that's why our show is important, to get this message out, to let people know there are other beliefs out there that are strong about America, you know, and suppress the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders and the Zohran Mamdani that's telling everybody how terrible this is, or Ilhan Omar saying that maybe it's the white men that are the problem. That was their whole thing when they came in. The squad is the white old patriarch, the misogynistic. Well, they're misandric, meaning that's the opposite of misogynistic, that hatred for women. The misandric is the hatred for the old white guard. And it's on display with the squad and those kind of people. And the Zohranis, he wants to go after white elites in neighborhoods. And that's not America. That is anti-American. And there's a lot of people out there, especially the youth, that feel like you and I do. And we just need to tell them it's okay. Believe in your country. Listen to Lee Greenwood. Say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Absolutely. Because people need to understand this. This is an experiment. America is an experiment, and we've not been around really all that long. And there's never been anything quite like America. And I want to play this very quick video, and we'll close the show out with this, and I'll give you the last word on it. But this is something that to me is a warning to people, because the light, the flicker we call freedom, is just a flicker in the darkness. Check out this video. It doesn't take much to blow out a flame. And, that's what scares me the most, Ted, is that we are that candle in the darkness. And if we're not careful, it could be snuffed out pretty quick.
It is. And I can't overemphasize that book I was telling you about, The Miracle of Freedom, the 7 Tipping Points that saved the world. There's only been 4.5 billion people out of 100 billion that have experienced liberty and freedom like you and I have ever experienced on the planet. 80% of us are alive today. It is fleeting. That's why we've got to celebrate the July 4th and what it really means. What it means, not just here in America or in Florida, but what it means around the world as what free men and women can do in a country with a system that protects your God-given rights. And you can do anything you want to do in America, really in any world, in any country that has our system of government. And it's here for everybody. Come join us. Don't try to take it away. You won't like the results.
What he said.
God bless y'all. Happy Independence Day.